So my name is Berni Good. I'm a psychologist, and my specialist area of research and work and consultancy is within the gaming environment and trying to understand gaming behaviour from a psychological perspective. Okay, from a psychological perspective, and in terms of the perception of the gamer, which is what the area that psychologists would look at, there's very limited research around that over here. So psychologists like me would look to pockets where free-to-play has been established for a long time, such as South Korea. So in South Korea, there's a couple of really interesting guys, psychologists called Park and Lee, who've developed some research around the perception of value for the gamer and how they perceive value within a free-to-play environment. Free-to-play is not going anywhere, so it's important that developers understand the psychological triggers that are going to engage the gamer within that kind of a monetization strategy without disengaging them and without the gamer coming away feeling that perhaps they have had the wall pulled over their eyes, for example. So Park and Lee's research uncovered some very interesting categories within the perception of value. For example, a gamer will see good value if they can pay for power and strength within their game play. So they're quite happy to do that. And for me as a psychologist, that's a really interesting area, because psychologists have uncovered that within this area that there is actually some quite fierce emotions at play. And the sort of emotions we've been looking at would be envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy are really strong emotions, very difficult for human beings to keep a lid on these kind of emotions. And psychologists have uncovered within a technical interaction environment, and they've done research actually within iPhones around this, that there are two types of envy. There is benign envy and there is malicious envy. When you apply that to the perception of the gamer and how they perceive value, for example, when they want to get a power up or strength or get a leg up somewhere in the gameplay, these two types of envy are very interesting. So the benign envy is when a gamer will perceive that another player has done very well, they've worked really quite quickly, for example through a grind, or they've taken out a boss quite quickly, or they've done something else in the gameplay that they admire. They're still jealous of them and envious of them that they've done that, but they don't want to pull them down, they want to elevate themselves up to that point. So within malicious envy, we see that a gamer might perceive that an individual hasn't quite warranted the place that they've got to in the gameplay. So they may have paid for a leg up, for example, or to get to the end of a grinding session, etc. So that's when a player will want to pull down the other player from an envy, jealousy perspective. So that's quite interesting. That's just one of the elements that the work that Park and Lee have uncovered in terms of perception of value in this free-to-play environment. Another area that they've looked at is something called conspicuous consumption, and that's been around since the 1900s. It's a very well-known psychological phenomenon where it's a bit like the peacock effect, where players will perceive good value if they can adorn their character, for example, in a really nice outfit or something like that. Because if I, as a player, look better than you, that kind of gives me a bit of an edge. So this conspicuous consumption is another area that Park and Lee in their paper have uncovered in terms of the perception of value of the player. So those are just some of the examples of the type of psychological research that's been done within these new monetization strategies. What's really interesting is that satisfaction within gameplay does not equate to, from a psychological perspective, does not equate to the gamer perceiving perception in terms of value. So even if a game is very satisfying to play, it does not necessarily mean that the player will actually spend any money in the game. So for the first time, really, designers and developers are having to include within their design strategies and development strategies these monetization strategies, and they absolutely ought to be based on the perception of the value for the gamer, because the gamer will not mind paying if they perceive that it's good value. So other areas like good monetary value, for example, and again, that's nothing new, that's really easy to understand. Buy one, get one free. You've only got to walk into any supermarket and understand that consumer psychological aspect. And to incorporate those into the development and design is quite appropriate in terms of the perception of the gamer, because they will perceive, as long as they are perceiving that they're getting some kind of value. It's really interesting because I think, and the research that I've done myself, suggests that gamers are really quite switched on to this. Where I think it's problematic is for minors, and I also think it's problematic for adults who might be vulnerable. So if someone has, is not mentally healthy, that's when it becomes problematic. For me, I think transparency is really important to the gamer, and I think because people are so switched on to these kind of strategies, it would be interesting for game developers and designers to try and have a little bit more transparency, perhaps. And I think that research that's underway at the moment with other colleagues of mine, other academics, that's yet to be published or finalised, is uncovering that as long as the viewer or the gamer is perceiving that they are not being conned and that it's transparent from the get-go, they're quite happy with these strategies. It's when they're faced with something a bit further down the line, when they're into the gameplay and they're not expecting to have to pay to get a level or to do something in the game, that's where it becomes problematic for the gamer. I think that there are aspects around minors and potentially some vulnerable adults where that kind of thing might be viable, but it would need to be researched extensively. And I know that the Office of Fair Trading at the moment are having an investigation in free-to-play for children and how the mechanics within that might work. And so I don't really have a yes or no answer to that, because I think it's a grey area. I think that developers and designers do have a responsibility to ensure that they are being as transparent as possible. And actually what's really interesting is that desire for continuation to play in a game and to avoid disengagement from a game, the more transparent and upfront developers are, the more likely they are to retain the player. I mean, that I've probably said it 10 times already, but that word transparency, it's really key, because you will get loyalty, brand loyalty, you will get people recommending you. And one of the big areas I see a potential growth in from a psychological perspective in terms of people, is people recommending games to other people. And we've seen that with a lot of the social games that are out there. And I think that that's going to play an even more important role. And there's that old adage that what only one person out of 10 will talk about how brilliant you are, but 9 out of 10 people will be very unforgiving if they don't feel you've been upfront with them as a supplier.